What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the 2026 mock offseason series. I'm not sure how many more of these I'm going to be able to cram in before free agency actually starts, but today we are talking about the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, seems like kind of the same old story with the Niners this year as far as injuries, falling short of a Super Bowl. As far as those things go, I think, that's been unfortunately kind of the norm for the Niners over the past, 5 to 10 years. So let's see what we can do today to maybe get them in a spot where they finally get over the hump. So, like I mentioned, obviously the 49ers again fell a little bit short of the Super Bowl, eventually losing to their division rival in the playoffs. I think as far as how many injuries they faced this year and all the adversity, the season actually ended up a lot better than I thought it was going to. You lose guys like Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, and obviously George Kittle, very late into that playoff game. But with all of those injuries, the fact that they even got this far is kind of remarkable. I think it's, really points out just how good of a coach Shanahan is and just how good of a quarterback Brock Purdy is. I know a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about Brock Purdy, especially when he got paid last year. I am personally a huge fan of Brock Purdy. I think there's a lot of very special things he can do, especially as a play-action passer and over the middle of the field. But that's a conversation for another day. Today, we are going to see if we can get the 49ers in a place where in their 2026-2027 season, they can finally win the Super Bowl. So let's take a look at possible restructures right away. So the 49ers, before we do anything, start with about $37 million in effective cap space. That's pretty good, right? You look at teams like Chicago from my first episode that were in the negative. So they're already in a pretty good spot. But with just restructuring two guys, Nick Bosa and Brock Purdy, you can save an additional $23 million. Obviously, Bosa and Purdy are guys that are going to be a part of this team for quite a while, I would assume. Two of their better players, two of their best players, I should say. In restructuring them, you get $17 million out of Bosa by restructuring and moving some guarantees around, and then an additional $6 million from Brock Purdy. So with just those two guys, shifting some money around, we're already up to about $60 million before we even get into re-signing internal free agents. As far as cuts go for the Niners, if you take a look at their salary cap table, especially looking at over the cap and kind of play around with what kind of money that can they save with possible trades or cuts, there's really not much they can do. There's not a whole lot of guys that they would reasonably cut and save money on. So I'm just not going to have them do it, right? I don't think obviously they're going to cut some guys. It's just how the NFL goes. But I don't think they're going to make any significant enough cuts to where they're saving a lot of money and that are really worth talking about today, right? So I'm just going to have them staying put as far as who's on the roster right now and going into internal free agency with that $60 million. So let's take a look at that right now. Taking a look at internal free agency, there are definitely a few guys that I think are meaningful contributors that the Niners are going to want to bring back, starting with that guy at the very top, Jauan Jennings. I know he's had his problems, third and Jauan. He had some, especially this year, it seemed like he got into a lot of, we'll call them scuffles on the field. A lot of guys, questioning his integrity as far as, being an NFL player goes. I don't think the Niners are going to care too much about that when it comes to, making sure their wide receiver room stays, at least solid. They're picking at the end of the first round, so it's kind of hard to get a true wide receiver one, all the way down there. And Jauan Jennings has been the closest thing to it, especially since Debo obviously gets traded and Brandon Ayuk. We're just not going to talk about Brandon Ayuk. I don't even know what to say about that situation. I think very obviously he will not be on the team next year, so we're not factoring him into that receiver room. Jauan Jennings is the closest thing they have to wide receiver one, and he seems to be pretty critical to the success of the Shanahan offense, especially post Debo and Brandon Ayuk. So definitely a guy we're going to try to bring back. We'll see what we got. Eddie Pinheiro, this is the first time we've had a kicker this high on the list, but he's been lights out, man. I think he missed maybe one kick last year. Obviously, as a Bears fan, I wish he would have been, that good as a Chicago Bear. He'd probably still be on the team. But for the Niners, he's been very consistent. Obviously, they take, a really high pick on Jake Moody. He doesn't work out, but he ended up helping the Bears this year. So, small world we live in, but Eddie Pinheiro's been really, really solid. Maybe we'll talk about bringing him back. Cleveland Farrell, I shouldn't say former. He's a draft bust, right? He was a top 5 pick for the Raiders a few years back. never has lived up to that. He actually had an okay year this year as a rotational guy for the 49ers. So we'll see if we bring him back. Yeturgos Matos, another guy who's, I would consider a draft bust. I want to say he was a second round pick out of Penn State. Just, has never developed into a really impactful pass rusher. And that's, to me, the biggest area of weakness for the 49ers. They were either dead last or bottom 3 in total sacks this year, which is just unacceptable for a team that, has built their foundation on strong defense, at least as far as, these Super Bowl caliber teams have gone. So we got to find a way to fix that. Spencer Buford as that rotational offensive line piece. Maybe he'll come back. We'll kind of look. He's nothing, unbelievable, but offensive line, it seems like there's an offensive line, problem in the NFL these days. It's just good offensive linemen never leave their teams because so many teams have so many weaknesses along their offensive line. So we'll see. He's a guy that I think is going to get paid more today than he would have, a few years back. Not only because obviously contracts continue to grow, but it seems like offensive line has become a bigger need and more of a scarcity than ever before. Kendrick Bourne, he's a character, man. I'm a big fan of Kendrick Bourne. He had those funny, comments this year about needing his bonus to pay for his wife's stuff, which was pretty funny to watch. And I know he had some pretty funny commentary on that. Especially it's weird with Brock Purdy. He's not, the most productive player in the world, but when Mac Jones came in this year, Kendrick Bourne was a stud. So he'd definitely be a guy I consider bringing back, as even if he's that wide receiver 4, maybe even 5 type of player for you. I think he's definitely worth considering. Brian Robinson, again, kind of spoiling my Packers episode. He's a guy that I had going to Green Bay in my episode, so I'm not going to bring him back here. I think he's going to look for a more extensive role elsewhere. And when the 49ers first acquired Brian Robinson, I actually kind of liked it. Maybe not for Brian Robinson as much, but I thought for the Niners that made a lot of sense. The thought process is you keep a guy like Christian McCaffrey fresh. You can use him, a whole lot in the receiving game and maybe give Brian Robinson some of those short yardage touches. That just really didn't happen this year. It was kind of just the Christian McCaffrey show, and Brian Robinson seemed to always be an afterthought. And I thought he'd be more involved this year, and he wasn't. So with the 49ers track record of, constantly replacing running backs behind their starters, I think Brian Robinson's just going to kind of fall into that mold of like, he was a 1-year, player for the Niners, and they're just going to go get somebody else. Sky Moore probably had the best year of his career this year with the Niners. Obviously, a former draft bust of the Chiefs. They kind of recycled him. He actually was relatively decent this year. I'm not sure if they're going to bring him back. I don't know if he was that decent. He's a pretty good special teamer, not much as far as a true receiver goes. And then Jake Tonjes, who's one of the more interesting guys on this list. He's a restricted free agent. Another guy who was formerly a Chicago Bear. He played really, really well this year in the absence of George Kittle. Like, I know, in the Bears-Niners game in the regular season, Jake Tonjes tore us up, man. And I don't know if that's more of a Jake Tonjes thing and more of a, weakness in the middle of the Chicago Bears defense thing. But he looked really, really good. And with George Kittle possibly missing all of next year, and who knows what his career is going to look like after that? Like, is this it for George Kittle? I know he doesn't want it to be, but we'll kind of see, how does that recovery process go? I think Jake Tonjes instantly becomes very, very important to the 49ers offensive success. So he's definitely a guy we're going to look to bring back. We'll kind of see what deal he'll get. But let's look at some of the guys that I think will be in the 49er uniform in the 2026-2027 season. So we have about, 4 guys coming back here. Could be more, could be less. I didn't bring really any of those pass rushers back. Talking about Cleveland Farrell, Yeturgos Matos. They're just not that good to me. I don't know if it's worth it. I like the idea of having, cheaper rotational pass rushers, but they're not really pass rushers, right? They don't really get after it. They didn't really make a difference. This team still really struggled getting after the quarterback. So I'm not even going to waste the time giving them another 1-year deal. I think we just need to get fresh bodies in there. I do have Juwan Jennings coming back on a 3-year, $50 million deal, which is, pretty substantial for a guy that's not a true wide receiver 1. However, again, you need some continuity in this receiver room. You have had so many injuries and weird situations with Debo and Ayuk and Pearsall. Obviously, all of these guys have missed so much time. And through all of it, Juwan Jennings has been really, really good. Despite some of the concerns that came up this year as far as like his, I don't want to say his attitude. I don't know the guy personally, but there was some weird stuff, right? I don't think that's enough to let him get out of the building. I think the Niners really value what he brings. So I'm going to have him coming back. Eddie Pinheiro, I know it's kind of weird to talk about a kicker in this light. I do think he's going to come back, right? He's been really good for the Niners. I think the Niners, more than anybody, do not want to go down the road of trying to replace, a kicker again. They obviously lose Robbie Gould a few years back and then draft Jake Moody out of Michigan really high. He's kind of a bum for them. They get Pinheiro in. He's solid. I think they just are like, you know what? We're not even going to mess with it. Let's keep the guy in and continue rolling with a solid kicker. Kendrick Bourne, I do have the Niners bringing him back on a 1-year, $3 million deal to be kind of that wide receiver 4 type role, as of right now, at least before the draft. I think he's definitely worth it. He'll never be, 1,000-yard type receiver for you, I don't think, barring some crazy, maybe injury or crazy explosion, especially late in his career like this. But I think he's worth bringing back. And then Jake Tonjes, right? 2 years, $8 million. I think if you told me, or really told anybody for that matter, that, a year or two ago that Jake Tonjes was going to be a $4 million a year type player, I think people would look at you crazy. I know I would. But he played really, really well this year. And he'll probably be the tight end 1 next year unless the Niners figure out something to do in external free agency or the draft. He's going to play a significant role. So I think he's earned his keep. That $4 million a year, I think that's just fine for a guy that has proven he can do it, right? So after bringing back these 4 guys, we go from that $60 million we had before down to about $32 million, which is still enough to make at least a few meaningful additions in external free agency. So let's talk about that. So with our $32 million, there are 3 guys that I think the Niners could bring in that would really, really help. The top guy there is Joey Bosa. It's finally happening. I have the 49ers reuniting the brothers. Obviously his younger brother, Nick Bosa, one of the best pass rushers in the league. Joey Bosa, formerly one of the better pass rushers in the league, has dealt with some injuries, but he had a really, really good year this year for Buffalo. Had his highest pass rushing grade in the past, I want to say 5 years. He finally stayed healthy. I think he only missed 1 game, which for Joey Bosa over the past few years is pretty spectacular. He had 5 sacks. He had a pretty decent pass rush win rate. He forced 5 fumbles, which is pretty good. And I think the opportunity to bring him in as that pass rusher opposite of his brother is a really, really cool opportunity that you don't get very often. And he's worth it, right? We just talked about how awful the 49ers pass rush has been. And I think having the Bosa brothers here, again, is Joey Bosa what he was 6 years ago as a member of the Chargers, early in his career? No, of course not, right? But I think he's better. He's better than your Turgos Matos. He's better than Keon White. He's better than Cleveland Farrell. And he's a better pass rusher than Mykel Williams as of today. So despite him, not being what he used to be, having some injury concerns, he is absolutely an upgrade. And on top of that, a really cool addition, getting to reunite him with his brother. So that's the first guy we're going to bring in. And then Justin Strnad, a guy who's kind of flown on the radar. He's a pretty underrated linebacker. Obviously a member of the Denver Broncos last year, who have one of, if not the best defenses in the NFL, kind of up there with Seattle. He's a 6'3", 235-pound, 29-year-old linebacker. He played over 500 snaps last year. And he's a true off-ball linebacker, but he had 5 sacks last year, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, Saleh leaves again after another, stint with the 49ers to be the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. But for those of you who don't know, the 49ers hired the former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, Raheem Morris, to now be their defensive coordinator. And if you watched any Atlanta Falcons football this last year, under Raheem Morris, who's, was there, he's a defensive-minded guy, obviously. He's obviously the one he wasn't calling the defense, but obviously he has a large hand in what they do on defense. They were one of the teams that blitzed almost more than anybody. They constantly brought 5-man rushes. So if you assume that kind of mindset of defense comes over with Morris to San Fran, I think Strnad is a perfect fit. He is such a good blitzer from his off-ball linebacker position. I think it just makes a whole lot of sense to bring him in, especially with their pass rush troubles. It's kind of an unconventional way to do it, right? Obviously, you think, I want an edge rusher that can really get after it, or, maybe defensive tackles that can push the pocket from the interior. But Strnad is a really, really, cool opportunity, really, really cool player to bring in. And then he allows, obviously with Fred Warner, I know I don't need to talk to anybody about how special Fred Warner is. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But having a guy like Strnad next to him, it's kind of that Dre Greenlaw thing. You get back that stellar interior linebacker duo. You can kind of let Strnad, have his hair on fire, go get the quarterback, and then allow Fred Warner to be that free-ranging middle-of-the-field player, which I think is where he's, the best. So Strnad is a really, really cool addition here. That's one of my favorite ones I've done so far. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. I know a lot of people don't really know much about Justin Strnad, but if you get a chance to watch some of his film from last year, he was a very critical part of a very good Broncos defense. And then the last guy I have coming in is Joel Bitonio. Obviously, a dude who's, he's past his prime. He's 34 years old. I don't think he's going to be playing for very long. Past this year, I have him on a 1-year, $4 million deal here. He's a former not only Pro Bowler, but first team All-Pro at guard. Is he that player anymore? No, he's not, okay? Which is fine, right? So if you're expecting him to come in and be a Pro Bowler or even an All-Pro, I think you're kind of selling yourself dreams there. However, he is still a very, very good guard, right? And we just talked about how there is like an O-line problem in the NFL, right? Supply is not meeting the demand. So even if he can come in for 1 year and be a plus starter for you, especially as a pass protector for Brock Purdy, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And it's a really cheap deal. I think Bitonio is going to want to go somewhere where he can finally compete for a Super Bowl. Obviously, being a member of the Cleveland Browns for the entirety of his career, I believe it's for the entirety of his career. Excuse me. I think entirety 2014 and now he has been a Cleveland Brown, and as all of you know, the Cleveland Browns have not done much winning in that time frame. So I think it makes a lot of sense for both parties, right? You bring in a guy like Joel Bitonio to solidify your offensive line, and he gets to chase a ring for maybe what will be the last year of his career. So after those three guys we bring in, we go from $32 million of cap space to just down to 13, which is totally fine. That will be more than enough to get their draft class situated and paid. So let's take a quick look at the depth charts before we get into a 49ers mock draft. So starting with the 49ers offense, not a whole lot changes here outside of Joel Bitonio kind of sliding in as that starting left guard for this season. I think that will serve the 49ers and Bitonio well. I think it's a pretty good mutual relationship there. Otherwise, you don't really have many changes. You still got Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey. As long as McCaffrey's healthy, I think this offense has a pretty high floor. Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Kendrick Bourne. The reason I don't know if I really needed to explain this too much, but I have wide receiver as one of those yellow positions, kind of a position of need in the draft. Demarcus Robinson is definitely a solid player. He's a good rotational guy. He's a good, wide receiver 3 or 4. I think you can definitely upgrade. I have Jacob Cowing behind him, a guy that I thought would be a little bit more productive. He has some really, really special kind of speed. He was a late round draft pick a couple of years ago out of Arizona. But I do still think they can make some upgrades in the draft at wide receiver. I do have tight end as, again, kind of a position of quote-unquote need. Is George Kittle a bad player? Or I shouldn't even say bad player. Is he anything other than a great player when he's on the field? No. Obviously, he's still one of the best tight ends in the NFL. But like we talked about earlier, he's probably going to miss all of, if not almost all of, the season next year with that torn Achilles. So you do have to start thinking about what does our future tight end room look like. Obviously, we extended Jake Tonjes, and I think that's a great, kind of serviceable option. But, over the past, however many years of Kyle Shanahan and George Kittle, working together, George Kittle has been really the engine of the offense. He's what makes the Kyle Shanahan offense go with his versatility as a blocker and receiver. So definitely a position we're going to think about, what can we do to make sure that is good long term. And then Trent Williams, he's one of the conversations we haven't had yet. Especially this week, a lot has come out about how the Niners and Trent haven't been able to, find a way to, get him paid the way he wants, and they don't seem to see eye to eye on, the future of Trent Williams on the Niners. If Trent Williams becomes a free agent, I don't care how old he is, he instantly becomes a top target for all of the 31 other teams in the NFL. He's just that good. Whether he plays another year or not, maybe he retires, right? I don't think that's going to happen. He seemed pretty sure that he wanted to play again. If I were the Niners, I would do everything I can to make sure he does not leave the building. Again, he's an older player, but he is just so dang good that I don't think you can justify letting him leave. And then left guard long term, obviously we have Bitonio there. That's not going to be your long-term answer. He'll be fine for this year. Jake Brendel had the best year of his career this year. He was pretty good. Dominic Pooney has been a really good draft pick at right guard. And then Colt McKivitz, kind of under the radar, just got an extension, so he will be the team's right tackle next year, barring some injury. But yeah, I think the main things you're looking at here, right, is can you get some more explosive pass catchers for Brock Purdy? What is the status of Trent Williams? I would be shocked if they let him leave, but you never know, right? The NFL is a business at the end of the day, so we'll kind of, wait and see on that. And then can you future-proof some of the interior offensive line positions, specifically left guard, So we'll kind of see how that goes. I do still think the 49ers offense is going to be very good as long as you have Shanahan, Purdy, and McCaffrey. I think you have a certain floor. But yeah, let's take a look at the defense, which definitely was kind of the sore spot of the team last year after all of those injuries. So as far as the defense goes, again, just because of, they don't have a crazy amount of money, we didn't make a whole lot of additions to the defense in free agency, but I do think we made some meaningful ones. So obviously you still have Nick Bosa and Bryce Huff. Your two interior guys, two guys you drafted last year in Alfred Collins and CJ West. I thought they both looked pretty good this year when they played. I do have that as kind of that position of need. Number one, those two guys aren't going to be enough to do it themselves. You need more guys in the interior room, just as bodies, period, but also guys, I think compared to Alfred Collins and CJ West, I think you want a guy that can rush the passer a little bit more. So we'll see if we can find that in the draft. We obviously brought in Joey Bosa to play opposite of his brother. I wouldn't be surprised if Mykel Williams, obviously, what was he, the 12th pick last year, which that's another conversation for another day. I'm kind of surprised he went that high. He's more of a run defender than he is a pass rusher, but regardless, they invested a lot in him. I wouldn't be surprised if, he's coming back from injury, if he's still that, quote unquote, early down starter for the Niners, but I think Joey Bosa will definitely come in on those, more obvious passing downs. You have D. Winters, Fred Warner, Justin Strnad in that linebacker room. Obviously, Fred Warner is unbelievable. He'll be back from injury. Justin Strnad, a guy I already talked about, kind of ad nauseum. I know a lot of people maybe don't want to hear about that as much, but I think he's a really, really awesome player. I do have that other linebacker position as kind of a position of need. D. Winters was less than stellar this year, especially when Fred Warner was gone. They drafted Nick Martin last year out of Oklahoma State. He's another guy that I think just got drafted a little bit higher than I expected. Maybe he'll turn into a really good player. I'm not going to bet against the Niners' development, but we'll see. And then corner, you got Renardo Green, Denominator Lenore, and Upton Stout. Lenore is obviously a very, very good player. He, typically shadows the other team's wide receiver one. He'll be on the team again this year. Upton Stout out of Western Kentucky last year played really well in the nickel. He's a smaller dude, but he's really, really good. And surprisingly good as a run defender, as with that smaller stature. You'd think maybe, he gets kind of bullied in the run game. I didn't really see that. I think his ability to shoot gaps and make plays, I think really popped, which is really, really, really good for the Niners. They need some young defensive talent. Renardo Green is a really good player. I do kind of have that as a position of possible need. We'll kind of see. I don't know if he's really blossomed into like the full-time consistent cornerback 2 that you want. Maybe you can take that next step this year. But I do think that's a spot that, do you consider upgrading at? We'll see. And then at safety, Malik Mustafa and Giari Brown. Mustafa's a really, really good player. Another dude that, struggled with injuries a little bit. But when he's on the field, he's really, really good. Giari Brown, maybe a guy you could upgrade from. We'll kind of see. This is a really, really good safety class, which I think would maybe entice the Niners into taking one of those guys at some point. So we'll have to see what the draft looks like. But going into the draft, we're looking at what does our tight end look like? Do we need a left tackle? Can we get any more explosive receiving threats? And then defensively, getting some more bodies in that interior defensive line room. Maybe adding another linebacker to play alongside Warner and Strnad. And then can we upgrade it in the defensive back room in any way? So with those things in mind, let's hop right into a mock draft for the Niners. So the 49ers, picking down here at 27, obviously despite all those injuries like we talked about earlier, they were still very successful this year, so they'll be near the back end of the first round. If we hop right into the draft, I think the Niners are actually going to be the first. We're 4 episodes in now. I think the Niners are going to be the first team that have 4 picks in 4 rounds, or at least 4 picks in 4 rounds, which is kind of cool. So yeah, you see they have 6 picks actually, because they have those 3 fourth-round picks. It's definitely possible they move off some of those, kind of switch picks around, maybe get back into the draft next year. We'll kind of see. But for our purposes, we're going to make these picks, right? They have the picks. We're going to make them. A lot of this is because the Niners are especially good at playing the compensatory pick market. They do a really, really good job of leveraging those and turning into some of those day 3 picks into meaningful players. So we'll see if we can do that here. Immediately, this guy, Kenyon Sadiq, this is another episode I'm filming just after the Combine. I don't know if he's making it to 27 after the Combine he had. I do have some questions about, his hands. Like, are they consistent enough to be like a real top option in an offense? We'll see. He still has some development to do as far as like the fluidity in his routes, but he is just an otherworldly athlete. I think if he makes it to 27, we talked about what does that, tight end room look long term. I think he's definitely a guy we consider. Another position we were looking at was interior defensive line. You definitely have some good options here. Peter Wood's a guy who had short arms, which I was a little bit, not, I don't want to say surprised by. I knew he wasn't going to be like the lankiest dude, but just with how good of a run defender he's been, especially in the past 2 years, like prior to this one, I thought he'd have longer arms. Obviously, he's lost a little bit of weight. He's 310 now. I want to say he was closer to 330 last year, so he lost a pretty significant amount of weight. But could still be a really meaningful, impactful defensive tackle. Lee Hunter, a guy who's, doesn't blow you away athletically, but is just so good as an interior run defender and does add some, pass rush upside. I think he definitely benefited from having guys like Romello Height and David Bailey, outside of him this year. So those are definitely two guys we consider. And then receiver, we talked about, can we make some meaningful additions? Casey Concepcion actually measured in bigger than I thought he was going to be. I think some people are, a little bit concerned about his size. Is he big enough to play, receiver consistently on the outside? I want to say he was like 5'11", which is, big enough to play on the outside. He looked really fluid, especially in those gauntlet drills. So he's a guy we consider too. There's a lot of really good options here. I do think if Kenyon Sadiq makes it to 27, which, again, anything is possible, right? And there are no absolutes in the NFL draft. You see guys slip all the time. I think if Kenyon Sadiq makes it to 27, Kyle Shanahan is going to have a very hard time controlling himself and not taking him, and I am too. I think he's such a good player, or let me rephrase that. I think he has the potential to be a very good player, but he is just such a good athlete. I think if I had to put him somewhere to be successful, it would be with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. So I'm going to take Kenyon Sadiq. I think he's just too gifted to not be a member of this team. And then in the second round, I'm sure we'll still have some good options here. Right away, kind of looking at that safety room, Kamari Ramsey's a good player. He's a guy we talked a lot about for the Bears. Zakeet Wheatley's really good. Genesis Smith is a freak athlete. He can't really tackle, which is weird because he's a pretty big safety. He's 6'2", over 200 pounds. He tested really well. For some reason, not a great tackler. Not really sure why that is, but he's a really good middle of the field safety. Wide receiver, there's a couple guys. Zachariah Branch, he's very gadgety, right? Like he led the Georgia Bulldogs in receiving last year. A lot of that was like screens, really short, those drag routes. He's really good with the ball in his hands. I don't know if he's worth 58, especially after coming into the combine almost 2 inches shorter than he was listed at Georgia. So, and then Malachi Fields and Elijah Surratt, two big-bodied guys, more kind of contested catch type of dudes. I'm not sure if you bring guys like that in, again, at 58 with Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings already on the roster. Man, there's a lot of ways the 49ers could look to go here. If we look at tackle, is there any... Jennings Dunker, I think, is a good guard, but I don't think he's going to play tackle in the NFL. Interior offensive line, we brought in Joel Bitonio, but Chase Besantis maybe is that guy for the future. Man, this is kind of a hard decision. There's a lot of guys I like here. Looking at pass rushers, is there more guys we can get to just get after the quarterback? Malachi Lawrence is a guy that, since the season ended, has only climbed boards. He had a really good all-star circuit and then a really good combine on top of it. So I think he could definitely be in play here as another edge rusher, behind the Bosa brothers and Mykel Williams. And then D-tackle, another position we were looking at. Dominique Orange is a guy I really like. He's a big dude. We talked about him for the Bears as well. Really good run stopper. But I think after looking at the board, Grayson Halton, who, as far as size goes, you look at 292, and that's pretty small for an interior defensive lineman, especially nowadays. But look at his run defense grade. You have an 87 run defense grade and over a 10% run stop rate for a guy that's probably 290 pounds. He probably played even lighter than that. I wouldn't be surprised if he played closer to 280. But if you can do that in the SEC, obviously the NFL is a different beast, but he is a good enough run defender. And with how athletic he is and his 10% pass rush win rate, 5 sacks this year from the interior, I think he's exactly what the 49ers want, right? You put him next to a true run stopper in Alfred Collins and let Grayson Halton, shoot gaps and get into the backfield. I think that's perfect. So I'm actually going to go with Grayson Halton. I didn't realize he was there right away. I love that for the 49ers. Zachariah Branch is still here. I think, near the back end of the top 100 is probably closer to where he's going to go, just with some size concerns. And, he's not, a particularly great route runner, which is weird. He's very sudden in and out of his breaks. But as far as his route running and route, recognition goes, I want to say, finding those soft spots in the defense, it's not that he can't do it. He's just never really been asked to do it. But I would really like him in a 49er offense as that wide receiver 3 kind of gadget screen. Obviously, he's not Deebo Samuel. He's like 30 pounds lighter. But I think he can do some of the Deebo Samuel things. I think that's intriguing. Looking at the defensive backs again, Genesis Smith is still here, which is really, really intriguing. Bud Clark, another guy that played really well at the Senior Bowl this year. He made some really big plays. I remember he had a really impressive interception, I want to say on day 3 of the Senior Bowl. He's a little bit better of a run defender than Genesis Smith, that is, excuse me. I think both those guys can make a lot of sense. Is there another corner we could bring in? Traden Stukes is really a nickel only. Malik Muhammad had an unbelievable combine. I actually really like Malik Muhammad. I think people were kind of underrating him after a pretty solid year at Texas. Obviously, kind of near the end of the year. Maybe less than stellar grades, but I think, you couple, his experience with his athleticism. I think he's going to be a good corner in the NFL. Will he be a great one? Maybe not. We'll see. I think after weighing our options, I am going to go with Zachariah Branch. Again, maybe a little bit of a combine quote-unquote loser just because he was a little bit smaller than people anticipated. But I think, again, if he's going to be successful somewhere, it's probably going to be in a Shanahan-style offense. And who better to run the Shanahan offense than Shanahan? So we're going to add him there. And now we have these 3 fourth-round picks. There's a lot of ways we could go with this. We'll kind of see what's available here. Safety, Michael Taft is a really good player. Really high coverage grade. He's a willing tackler. He's not particularly physically imposing. He's a little bit smaller, about 6 feet tall, about 190 pounds. So he's a little bit smaller of a dude, but I think, again, those Texas defensive backs have a lot of experience, have played in a lot of big games. I think he could be an immediate upgrade at safety, maybe over Giari Brown. Tackle, again, is there a guy I love? Obviously you can't replace Trent Williams, but if he walks out the door, in this scenario, I don't have him leaving, but it's always possible. And even if he stays, how much longer is he going to play? You never know. Possible edge rushers. I don't really love a lot of these guys. Max Llewellyn's a pretty good player. He's a really poor run defender for some reason. He's a big dude. He's 260 pounds at 6'5". He's a guy I'd consider. I'm not sure if I'd pick him here. I think I like him more a little bit middle of day 3. We'll see. I think I will go with Michael Taft. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think he's just so solid. He's a consistent, defensive back type of player. We'll kind of see. It's a little hard to project, what role is he going to play with the 49ers. They ask their safeties to do kind of a lot of things, but we'll see. I think at the very worst, he's a safety 3, a potential ball hawk. So I like that pick for the 49ers, especially in the 4th round. So now, quick review. They've upgraded at tight end, added a gadget wide receiver. Grayson Halton's a dude I'm really excited about for this team, and then Michael Taft as a rotational piece in the secondary. It feels like they need to take O-line at some point. I don't know who that's going to be or when, but this could definitely be the time. J.C. Davis, I love. I wouldn't be surprised if he was a late day 2 guy. He's been so productive for the Illini. He has played pretty much solely, as you can see, not pretty much. He has played solely left tackle for Illinois. A lot of people think he's going to play guard, which I kind of agree with, right? I think there's some, kind of foot speed and length concerns with him. But again, we talked about Joel Bitonio maybe being the starter this year. What does guard look like in the future? I think J.C. Davis is what guard looks like in the future. So I am going to take J.C. Davis here. He's a guy I wouldn't be surprised went, closer to 100 or in the top 100. So getting him here at 133 near the back end of the 4th, I think is really good value. And then with the last pick of the 4th round, again, a lot of picks here for the 49ers, right? So this is kind of fun. This is a little bit different than what we've seen with the previous, 4 teams now? 3 teams now that we've done? 3 teams. I do still want to look for a rotational pass rusher. There's not a lot of guys I love for that role here. Maybe we'll kind of pivot from that. We already took receiver. We took tight end. I don't think they're going to force running back. They took Jordan James last year. They still have Isaac Garendo in that room. Corner's a position we talked about. There's a couple guys I like here. Takario Davis, a guy that, a couple years ago, 2 years ago as a member of Arizona, a lot of people thought was a potential first-round pick. He has legit size. He's 6'4". He ran a 4.40 or a sub 4.40 at the combine, which is just insane. Since then, he struggled with injuries and kind of struggled overall with consistency. He's still a guy that, at the end of the 4th round, I think, it's kind of like a why not, right? You're betting on the upside here. Jalen Kilgore might be more of a safety in the NFL. He played almost exclusively slot this year for the Gamecocks, so we'll kind of think about that. I think Upton Stout's kind of taken over that nickel role, and we just drafted a safety, so maybe a little bit redundant as far as skill set goes. I do think I'm going to go with Tack Davis, only because, number one, you're betting on the upside. You're in the back of the 4th round, right? You're not taking a guy with a top 100 pick. It gets an F, but again, to bet on a guy that's 6'4", and a ridiculous athlete that once upon a time was a very productive player, I think is fine as a rotational corner. Kenyon Sadiq as a C at 27 is unbelievable. Don't pay too much attention to these grades. I think a lot of people would be shocked if he even made it 27. Grayson Halton is a D+. I think after this big board gets updated post-combine, both of those guys are going to kind of fly up. They probably won't even be here at these picks, to be honest. Obviously, we bring in Zach Branch to be that kind of screen threat. Michael Taff as a rangy kind of, safety 3 for now. J.C. Davis as a long-term play at interior offensive line. And then Tack Davis, like we just talked about, that high upside cornerback piece. So I'm really happy with this. I think the Niners have a really good blend of, addressing needs while also betting on guys' upside, which they seem to love to do. I think that they love to bet on the athletic upside of players every year. You look at guys like Mykel Williams last year or Nick Martin last year, guys that, weren't necessarily the most productive college players, but were really, really good athletes. I think you see a little bit more of that, with this draft, but also a little bit of a higher floor with guys that have also been, good college football players. So you guys let me know what you think. I know I don't have that many 49ers fans as friends or family, but my boy Kobe, Bang Bang Niner Gang, definitely want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think of this draft? What do you think of the Niners rebuild? And can they get back to competing for a Super Bowl? Other than that, it's going to do it for me. I'm going to try to get at least one more of these done prior to free agency actually opening, and look out for a mock draft in the next week or two. I want to do like a post-combine kind of first-round mock talking about some of the risers or maybe fallers from the combine. So look out for that. Other than that, it's going to do it for me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you later.